Namaskar and welcome to NatStrat Conversations. We bring you conversations on geopolitics, security, economy, technology, and we are very grateful that you watch our programs and our shows as we go along. Today we have with us someone who is a scholar but also who has on-field experience, who has actually been to areas that matter for India directly, of direct interest to India. Um, Rami Desai is an anthropologist, but she has been in the thick of developments in two geographies which are critical for India, Myanmar and Bangladesh, and also the associated Northeastern region. So today I would like to discuss with her that entire region of Myanmar, Northeast, and Bangladesh, and the intersection between these borders. And she's spent a lot of time in Myanmar, not easy, and she's written a lot, she's spoken about it, and I would say one of the most current and foremost experts on that region. And so, therefore, it's important that we talk to her on this region, which is not normally focused upon in India and is somewhat neglected. So, Ramiji, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm so glad that we're focusing on this region.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I know you're a busy person and you've just visited Myanmar a few days ago. So let's begin with Myanmar. I mean, you have such prodigious knowledge. You've spent time, years, decades perhaps, studying Myanmar. You're one of the very few experts who understand the country and you know the people. So, to begin with, just kick off. How do you see the situation today compared to, say, after the coup in 2021? Now we are 4 or 5 years down the line. So, in your most recent visit and the elections have just been held, how do you see the situation?
Um, I think, first of all, let me clarify nobody can be an expert in this region simply because it's so dynamic. It changes all the time. It's so complex. There are so many different facets to it that it's a lifetime of studying. And
True.
of course, I've spent a couple of decades studying the Northeast and therefore a lot of the border regions. But I have to say, these are difficult areas. And one can only be as current as, that very
Yeah.
instant.
Yeah.
So, yes, I have traveled to Myanmar a couple of weeks ago. I was there for the elections. I had an opportunity to observe the elections very, very closely. Um, I was an independent observer and I visited 6 constituencies. So, a couple of things. Yes, it's been a considerable amount of time since the coup. And I think what we all knew that an election was going to happen. There wasn't any two questions about it. Of course, some people thought that this would continue, under the military regime. But you see, it became very important for the Tatmadaw to gain international legitimacy, which
Right.
they weren't getting out of being in absolute power, so as to say, after the coup. And therefore, the pressure was building up from ASEAN, from the West, and many other countries who were refusing to engage. Therefore, it became very important to conduct the elections as quickly as possible. Would you say that these elections are inclusive? Not entirely, because,
Yeah.
of course, NLD was not a part of it. A lot of senior NLD leaders would say that they were not allowed to be a part of it under the new registration laws. Election registration laws. But if you ask the other side, they'd say that they did not want to register. But were there other parties that were involved? Yes, there were, I think, approximately 62 political parties, out of which 6 contested nationally, and the rest were regional parties. I'm sure we'll talk about the process of the election later, but your specific question was, how do I see it evolving? I think this election is going to get Myanmar the international legitimacy that it wanted, even if not in its entirety, but still more than it had before. I think more engagement with countries is going to continue or start even with some countries. For example, Japan has said once the elections are over, we'll engage. Russia, Belarus were already on board. China was on board. But other countries are going to be more robust with their engagement. Is the conflict going to stop?
That's what I wanted to ask you. Yeah.
Now that's a completely different ballgame.
So on that, like a basic question, from 21 till now, how much of Myanmar does the ruling military junta control? I mean, can you shed light on that? Is the control shrinking? Are they in charge? I mean, who's running Myanmar? Who's governing Myanmar?
That's always an interesting question to me, and I'm glad you asked it, because you see, how do we look at control? In my opinion, do you look at control in terms of territory or in terms of population? Because if you look at territory, and there's no exact number, if you look at territory, maybe it's even,
50-50?
Let's say 50-50. Let's say, maybe even a little bit more in terms of the Tatmadaw. If you look at population, there's a clear difference there, because majority of the population is controlled under the Tatmadaw controlled areas.
That's the Bamars.
That's the Bamars. That's Yangon. That's up till Mandalay. So Yangon has a considerable population. They have, let's say, give or take, about 52 million people. A lot of people have left as well since the coup. But here's the problem. The ethnic armed organization-controlled areas don't necessarily have a robust administration process. They don't have electricity. They don't have basic necessities like, let's say, clean water. There isn't necessarily peace in those areas because there are some internal conflicts as well. Yangon, comparatively, or Mandalay, is fairly peaceful.
Okay.
By most local assumptions, there are about 2.5 million people that have migrated there. That could be an exaggeration, but even if it's half of that, that's a considerable amount of population that's moved to Yangon post the coup.
Right.
So population-wise, yeah, they might have more. The Tatmadaw, the military junta has more control. Territory-wise, it could be even. Are they losing out in this conflict? I would have to argue no.
Okay, that's interesting.
Now, the reason being multiple things, and we have to look at it in different ways. One, there is a considerable Chinese influence on some of the larger ethnic armed organizations. For example, MNDA, TNLA, the organizations that control more of the northern areas towards the China border.
Right.
China supports the Tatmadaw, has supported these elections. And therefore, China can influence these organizations, these ethnic armed organizations that are under their control, to sort of have some amount of relationship with the Tatmadaw. So, for example, when the elections happened, they were able to hold elections in these areas. I think some of these areas even had 95% turnout. The Wa state, we know again, has a great influence of the Chinese. They had a huge turnout of elections. Now, the border areas across India, India's northeastern border.
So I just wanted to come to that in a minute, but if you can just focus a little more on so for what you're saying, control has not rapidly diminished.
No.
Of the junta in Myanmar.
No.
That's very interesting. So you mean they have managed to tide over the rebellion and the protests, and from what you're saying, they seem to be okay in terms of running the country?
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
You've held some important positions yourself, and you'll realize sometimes what we see in the media does not really translate to what we see on ground. As much as many people find it unsavory, but that's the fact. And there are reasons for it. There are very legitimate reasons for it. This is not like the 888 revolution. This is not like what happened in 1988, which saw the emergence of Aung San Suu Kyi as a big leader.
Right.
That revolution saw Aung San Suu Kyi as a leader. She kind of brought all these groups together, the democratic forces together. And leadership is very important for any revolution to take shape into a political process.
Correct.
Even after the coup in 2021, NUG was formed, which was the National Unity Government, which was an umbrella entity,
Right.
which had a lot of EOs which were a part of it. Did they have a singular leader? No. If I was to ask you or anybody else, have they heard of a singular name that has come up from the opposition? Nobody will know a single name. Nobody would even know random names. You might know.
Okay. So if we put aside this and we conclude that your assessment is that the military is not in retreat and they're okay in terms of overall control, then I'd like to ask you, you mentioned all this, but a little more about the ethnic armed organizations that are in the periphery of Myanmar. And particularly, let's start with those which are on the India border. Because, Myanmar, just for the sake of the audience, has borders with China, with Thailand, with Bangladesh, with India. And each of them has their own specific characteristics. But can you tell us and talk a little more about those who are on the India border, what they are, how they are faring, what are they doing, and how much control the junta has or Tatmadaw has on the bordering areas with India?
I think your last part is the critical question, because out of 330 townships that went into that they have, there were 64 townships where 62 townships that they could not conduct elections in. We must recognize the fact that over 40 were across India's borders. That tells us that the conflict still resumes across India's border more than any other part of Myanmar.
I see.
More than any other border. And that's what makes it very, very important for us. Makes it very critical for us to now refocus. We've always had this right at the outset. You said that, we've not really looked at these borders as closely.
Correct.
Before.
Yeah.
Because we've been sort of focused on the northwestern border.
Right.
But because of what we are seeing across the northeastern borders now, it's become imperative to focus on it. And the elections and where they could conduct it and where they couldn't is an indicator of how much conflict that there is. And I think in that sense, we have to understand the groups that operate across the border.
Yeah. Can you talk
So you have Kachin Independence Army, which has been the oldest group in Myanmar. You have the Chin the Chin National Front, you have the Chin Brotherhood. Now remember, these are not consolidated groups. This is not one group, like especially amongst the Chins. I think the CNF has, maybe about 15, 16 groups under it that it's brought together. Now it's split with Chin Brotherhood and they have another 6, 7 groups under them. The bifurcations and the fragmenting and the fissures between these groups are massive.
Within the groups.
Yeah. So we are not dealing, some of the groups are fairly, strong in terms of they've managed to keep themselves together. Whether it's the KIA or then the other group that we've been hearing of very often, Arakan Army. They are still intact. But the Chin groups, which are literally across
That's across Mizoram.
Across Mizoram. And then, they move around quite a bit as well. They're fragmented. There's infighting. They don't really get along with each other. They have different political roadmaps. It's very, very difficult for India to be able to engage. Who do you engage with?
What about the Arakan Army?
The Arakan Army is an extremely important, organization that we've started looking at. I believe we used to look at them before also. But I think now with how the situation is in Myanmar, irrespective of the elections, it's very important to look at with a new lens. Because they're a formidable group. They are young. They took their training from KIA. They have their soldiers across Myanmar. So there was the Four Brotherhood Three Brotherhood Alliance, because now there's a Four Brotherhood in Bangladesh. Yeah. So there was the Three Brotherhood Alliance, which included TNLA, MNDA, and Arakan. Now imagine Arakan went and fought on the northern side, which is fairly, it's not close to them. So they have the ability to do that. Their leadership is young. Their leadership knows how to manage the narrative.
And how much territory do they control?
They
The full Rakhine?
They control all of Rakhine, except 3 townships. So out of the 17 townships that there are, 3 they don't, which is Sitwe, Chafu, and that has the Chinese.
Right. And also some of our stuff.
Sitwe, Chafu, and then there's an island off. So these are the 3 townships that they don't. But what's interesting is that they've moved into Chin territory.
I see.
To a town called Paletwa.
Oh, yes, Paletwa.
Yeah,
correct.
so they've moved into there. And that's one of the reasons for the big fissures between CNF and CB. Because CNF, being an erstwhile EO, says that CB has, feels that CB has maybe backstabbed us by allowing Arakan to come this far. They could come further.
Right.
But that being the internal problem, I think what we have to look at it as a organization that has come out of nowhere, is very young, has young educated leadership, has managed to just become bigger and stronger, has very clear ideas of how they are going to engage outside, how they are going to engage with the Rohingya issue, for instance, how they are going to engage with the Tatmadaw. And I think in a very mature, and I don't say this as a compliment or not as a compliment, but in a way they've kept their future plans ambiguous. So they've used the word confederation, they've used the word unitary, they've used the word federation. Nobody knows what they want. So they've kept the channels of communication open. They have no dearth of weapons, they have no dearth of training, they are, I find them a formidable group. And considering that they are on the border that they are, which has these 2 very important ports, and our Kaladan multimodal project will go through there, makes it more so important for us.
Yeah. Very nice. Fantastic. Thank you. So now just to take this a little forward, India and their relationship with us. I mean, I wanted to ask you about the weapons and all. You've spoken of that, how well armed they are and all. Now on India, what's their relationship with India? How do they treat the bordering states? How do they look at India? And, so a little bit on that.
See, there are a lot of days
Correct.
in Myanmar.
Absolutely.
There isn't one day.
Correct.
So generally, and I've had the opportunity to travel by road, the length and breadth of the country. Of course, there's a lot more that I need to cover.
Were you safe? I mean, was it safe to travel for you alone?
If I was to be really candid, when you do go to the Tatmadaw controlled areas, if you go to Yangon, sure, there is a sense of, feeling a little bit that you need to be careful. But is everything functioning? Yes, it is functioning. Is everybody happy with the Tatmadaw? Not really. There are people who...
But is there deprivation, poverty?
Of course, their economy has reduced considerably. Yeah. There were sanctions on them.
Yeah.
The tourism had decreased, though let me tell you, domestic tourism had increased. So, of course, there are problems like this, and those problems will continue because the border areas are still compromised. But the ethnic armed organized controlled areas were not that easy to go into. Those are tough ones because you don't know which part is being controlled by whom, who are you supposed to speak to.
So as an Indian, were you particularly more vulnerable than anyone
else?
No,
they're very nice people. I wouldn't paint everybody with the same brush because every community, every ethnicity there is different. The Bamars are not the same as, let's say the Chins are not the same as the Kachins. Everybody is very different. They have a lot of diversity. But are they generally favorable to India? Yes, they are. They don't see Indians as transactional, which we're not. We are fairly fair people. We don't interfere or meddle on any level in any country's internal...
So you would say at a kind of a people's level,
people's level, but even they respect the fact that we don't internally meddle with their political situation. We don't put value judgments on them. And I don't think we do that anywhere, and that goes a long way. Many people look at it as fence sitting. But you see, things are dynamic, they change. And
so we have to balance between them and Tatmadaw.
we have to balance between everybody. And our responsibility is primarily towards the people on ground. And we did a really good job during Operation Brahma when the big earthquake happened. I happened to be there. And I remember getting calls saying that, oh, is India going to send humanitarian aid? And where is it going to send? And before I'd hung up, we were the first responders. We were on ground. And we did a brilliant job. We got a lot of goodwill. People don't see, like I said, people don't see us as transaction. And the reason I say that is because people see the Chinese influence as transactional.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about the cross-border. How much of actually before we go to China, how much of the problems in the Indian Northeast, let's say in Manipur or in Mizoram or in other states, I mean, can you just talk a little bit about the cross-border linkages?
I think, again,
of insurgents and the whole cocktail of narcotics, weapons.
That's actually like really, really important to us, because that's going to have long-term consequences, not just on the Northeast, but the people of the Northeast. I'll give you a couple of examples. Post the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, the entire poppy cultivation shifted to Myanmar. So Afghanistan used to produce 90% of the world's poppy. Taliban, in the hope of being legitimized, enforced its crackdown. When they did that, the ready supply chain routes were in Myanmar, because Myanmar has been a hub for some amount of synthetic drugs. But it wasn't ever this big. And when the crackdown happened, they needed a ready-made, they needed a ready-made place to go to. And Myanmar, with its political turmoil, with its conflict, was the perfect place to shift, and they could shift overnight. Now, what's happened since then is Myanmar has become the epicenter of methamphetamine production across the world.
It's incredible.
And when I mean across the world, and I don't know why our media doesn't talk more about this, why we don't really take this as not just a problem of our neighborhood, but a problem that's going to have an impact on health, development, and security in India. Methamphetamines come in two forms largely. One is yaba pills, which have been around since the 70s, but now they are just the production has increased. And we're not talking about small labs somewhere in the corner. We're talking about sophisticated labs that are able to produce the largest amount of methamphetamines ever produced in the world. UNODC has called Myanmar the epicenter of the world's production of synthetic drugs. I quote this very often, and I'd like to quote it again because I think it really gives us an idea of the kind of quantities that are going out. Last year, the Indian Coast Guard in the Andaman Nicobar Islands caught a trawler. This wasn't a big sophisticated ship or boat. This was a trawler, a Myanmarese trawler which carried about 6,000 kilos, worth about, I think it was about $2.5 billion worth of methamphetamines, something like 30,000 pills, if I'm getting the statistics right, of methamphetamines. That is just one load. But we have this coming on a daily basis. Just follow the news coming out of Mizoram, which has become now the center. Champhai district is the district where, it's distributed from. Tamumore Road, another area of entry. Just follow the news and you will see on every second day, you will find hauls being caught of like 30 crores, 50 crores, 100 crores. But see, what you catch is only a percentage of what is coming through.
True, of course.
UNODC takes 10% of what is, how they estimate is they only take 10%, that this is only 10% of what is being produced. At which point they're taking about $40 to $50 billion worth.
40, 50 billion.
Now,
Billion or million?
billion. So we are now talking in billions. And the same methamphetamines you now find in going as far as Japan, as far as Australia. So the networks are huge. We can spend our time trying to calculate how much it is. We're never going to get an exact number. But the fact that because of the heroin usage increasing, because of the increase of narcotics coming through the borders, and our borders, 1,643 kilometers with Myanmar, are porous. Mizoram has recorded the highest HIV in the country, which is about, I think, 2 times more than the national average. Manipur comes at second and Nagaland comes at third. How is this not going to affect society? Also, while I was there, I realized, because I spoke to a lot of local people, I spoke to people who did business with, other local businessmen or Chinese businessmen. There's an interesting story, and I've often talked about the story when I've given talks on Myanmar, just to indicate how quickly the drug business is also changing. So this Indian guy, he was a businessman, and he told me, he said, I said, what do you guys drink when you meet? How do you socialize? How do you cut deals with the Chinese, considering you're Indian? Where's the trust? Oh, we go out, we have drinks, and, we have these bars that we go to. And I said, what do you drink? Do you drink whiskey? And he said, yeah, usually, the Chinese are very fond of drinking and all. But last time I went, they gave me something that looked like water. I said, what was it? He said, I have no idea. But they encouraged me to drink it. I drank it. And he's not really like a teenager. He's well into his 60s. So he said that I partied all night. I danced all night. Next morning, I had no hangover. Nothing. And I came back from my partying. I woke up my family. And it's a funny story because they asked him for he was very emotional, and he spoke about family bonding, and he said, what do you want? What can I do for you? And they said, we want this, we want to go shopping, we want a private trip here. He said, I said yes to everything. Next morning I woke up, I had no recollection. I had no hangover. I said, do you know what it is? He said, no, I don't. But it was tasteless, it was odorless. So when I did some more digging, I found out it was something called happy water. Or at least it seemed like that. Now we haven't even heard of it.
It's incredible.
Now imagine, we haven't even heard of it, but there are probably other drugs that we haven't heard of. And if it's something's tasteless, maybe something's odorless, how do we even catch it?
Incredible.
So
yeah.
it's becoming, one can keep talking about the narcotics business, but you know very well that the narcotics business is what funds insurgencies as well.
Yeah. So on the insurgency, I mean, how's the situation now? I mean, Manipur and the related nearby.
Look, I think the debate here, and a lot of people love to hate me on this because, there's a question of border fencing.
Yes.
Sure, physical fencing is not possible. 1,643 kilometers is tough to fence, requires huge amount of money. But apart from that, some areas are just not fenceable. There's also transnational ethnic ties that we must be respectful of. But what do you do? Because as the conflict ensues, there's also going to be, if we don't watch out, and I'm sure our security agencies are very smart and they know these things better than I do, but there's going to be a revival of IIGs, the Indian insurgent groups, because there's no dearth of money with the narcotics business. There is no dearth of them being able to buy weapons to the extent that they have drone teams, insurgent groups across. They have drone equipment. They no longer are assembling drones from spare parts as they were 2 years ago. Now they're just buying sophisticated drones outright. They have anti-drone systems. So this is stuff that we need to be careful of. Plus, what do you do with the narcotics trade? How do you prevent it from coming in? And that, of course, is, I think, the bigger problem. But what is also getting people a little nervous on ground is any sort of demographic change. The Northeast is very sensitive. People of the Northeast are very attached to their land. Any sort of demographic change is worrisome to them. And if the conflict continues, even though the poor people of Myanmar, they're suffering, And it's not as if they're coming by choice. A lot of them go back also. But it's like this: if 100 people come in and 80 go back, 20 still stay on. So that
Yeah, but
eventually will cause
that's
fissures.
despite the fact that there are tribal affinities between the Chins on both sides. And
See, now that also keeps changing, because again, these are not umbrella groups. These are umbrella groups. These are not like, intact homogeneous groups. It's very similar to, let's say, if one was to understand it from a historical perspective, like the Nagas. If you go to a Naga grandmother, she doesn't call herself a Naga. She calls herself an Ao or an Angami, or, from their tribal name. And there are tribes and there are sub-tribes. And all of them didn't have a singular language or a singular way of life.
true.
So these umbrella identities are given, and sometimes they're manipulated as well.
So, everything that you're saying tells us why we need to have much more discussion and awareness about that part of India. Now, I just want to shift a little bit to the other dimension of this whole problem, which is China. Of course, we know the Chinese involvement and so on. But I remember you told me about the cyber crimes and the labs, and you painted such a graphic picture. So, and this is something which is affecting people everywhere in India. Can you just talk a little bit about the location, the scale, the modus operandi, and where are we today on all of that?
So again, this is going to be the next world problem. Nobody ever thought that digital crime, cyber crime would be this big. I think last year it was recorded, and this is again, everything that we state as statistics of how grave the situation is only a fragment of what it really is. So they said that India had about 22,500 crores of losses. But these are again only reported cases. There must be so many that aren't. There must be so many that are smaller amounts.
Sure.
Some of them are big amounts. Coming back to the Three Brotherhood Alliance, because this is very important to understand where it came from, is a lot of these cybercrime and gambling centers used to be based in the Shan state, Kokang region.
That's neighboring China.
Now, what was happening?
So, which is far from the India border.
Correct. Now, what was happening at that point, it was affecting a lot of Chinese people, because a lot of the recruitment was from China. A lot of youth were being enticed into these businesses. Maybe they didn't have jobs, maybe they were okay doing it, we don't know. But there were what was called the four main families of Lokang, which is a city there. And these four families controlled the cybercrime and the gambling business.
In the Shan state.
In the Shan state, in this Kokang region. And as you know, China has a one-child policy. So if a child goes missing, it's a very big deal for a family. So China was feeling the pressure, and they kept appealing to Myanmar to shut down these scam centers, shut down these gambling centers. And the Tatmadaw didn't. And therefore, it's said that with the backing of China, the Three Brotherhood Alliance was launched. MNDA, TNLA, and Arakan Army. MNDA, the leader of MNDA, Ping, he was in China, and he was sent back to regroup and to be able to launch this attack. When that attack happened, the Tatmadaw decided to shut down the gambling units and pick up these four families and hand them over to the Chinese. Incidentally, it's only last week they were sentenced to death, and the executions have taken place last week. They were put on a plane, sent back, the gambling centers were shut down, and nobody knew what happened to them till the sentencing was announced, and those sentences were took place last week. Now, these sentences had to move somewhere, and they moved to Mayawadi, which is on the border of, it's a town on the border of Thailand and Myanmar. On the other side is Mesot, which is a small dusty town, and you wouldn't believe that this is Thailand. It looks nothing like Thailand, but I believe it's the epicenter of all agencies. It's the epicenter of everything notorious happening. And it's divided by a small little river called Moi, which is completely dry. during the summer seasons, and it's not a very deep river. So it's very easy to cross over as well. It's very easy to come out of there as well. You can just walk through the river. So now that has become the epicenter of cyber crimes. These are no longer little, again, they're no longer little places. These are complete compounds. These compounds are run by syndicates, Chinese syndicates at that. And at any given point of time, and I met some of the NGOs that are working very closely, they say, they quote that this is the single largest event in history, apart from slavery, of human trafficking in the world. At any given point of time, they estimate there are 200,000 people in their compounds. I met up with 3 Indian boys who had escaped from these compounds. And they told me their story. And it was interesting because, look, first of all, we have to understand that we've repatriated a lot of Indians who have come out of these cyber scams. The Indian government has done a phenomenal job. But what has been found is that not all of them are innocent. And that is what came out of my 3 interviews as well. Out of the 3, 1 accepted that he knew exactly why he was going. He was told that he had to do scams. He was from Punjab, and he was under immense debt. And this seemed like a good pay package. And he was asked to do some sort of love scams. The other 2 denied any knowledge of this. They were from Bangalore, and they said that they were contacted on Telegram. All of us have gotten these, little work from home sort of messages and saying you'll make a lot of money either on Telegram, either on other social media channels. And they received it as well. They had multiple interviews online, but it was on Zoom and or maybe other such communication, but they couldn't see the face of the person interviewing them. And they were told that they just need to reach Thailand, and then from there they will be taken in and they'll sort everything out. They were under the impression they were coming to Thailand to work. Now, because that boundary is so little, you wouldn't even know when you go across. But when they went across, they said it was, they were in shock, because they said that, oh my God, there were so many people of different nationalities. It was like a proper center. We had training courses. We had an HR. We had orientation classes. Now, they were lucky. Again, it's a funny story if you look at the funny side of it. They had overstated their proficiency in English. So once they reached there, those guys realized they didn't speak English. Now, how were they going to do these scams? So they were shifted from one scam center to another, and they kept failing all the tests. Their handler didn't want to bring them back because each handler gets $2,000 per person that he brings in. So he kept trying to sell them to other centers. Eventually, nobody wanted to take them, and they started getting worried because they were told by some of the other people inside that if you are of no use, they organ trade. And I think, at least my assessment was, and I don't make light of this at all, but sometimes in the kind of work I do, you have to see the funny or the ironic side of things. They cried so much. They were so upset. They were so unhappy that they were thrown out of one of the centers. And they said, we didn't know where to go, but we had a mobile phone with no SIM. They'd taken our SIM out. They sold that mobile phone and got somebody to bring them to Mesot. And that's where they got the NGO, this, that, and they were being sent home. But this is a very recurring problem.
Yeah. So this is the horrific account. I mean, and the scale.
The scale is enormous. It's not going anywhere. I think digital scams are going to become our next world big problems. If you remember, it was just a couple of days ago that in Cambodia also they caught the cyber scam units, and they had Indian government emblems.
That's right. That's right.
So they're doing it at we hear also, it's become very common that elderly people are are succumbing to these frauds a lot more with digital arrests,
Correct.
having transferred all their earnings. So obviously they're very good, they're very convincing,
So,
and
yeah,
India's a big market.
has anyone given a valuation to into financial valuation of?
It's impossible because across the world you don't know where all they're operating. But I do know this, that I was told that there are a lot of people from other nationalities. So there are Pakistanis, there are even Nigerians. So the Nigerians were called in saying that you'll be football coaches. So obviously it's very spread out in terms of outreach. But cyber scam doesn't need to be limited to one region.
Yeah.
I'm sure, you have cyber scam that's coming out of here that may be going as far as
But
America.
Rami, if you know so much and you know about all of this, I'm sure there are others whose job it is to also know this.
Absolutely.
And the question then comes of the response.
Absolutely. So I do believe that the Indian government's done a good job, because I was there when one of the repatriations happened, and they really negotiated in a way where, straight from Mesot, they were taken and they were debriefed. Like I said, I think they're aware of the fact that not all of them are innocent.
True.
These cyber scam places, I think it's important to realize that they work like little cities. They have supermarkets, they have discotheques, they have pubs. There's a lifestyle that comes with it. A lot of them have gone on to become managerial level. It's almost like a corporate system. Now, if you're getting paid a percentage of the scams that you are successful in, or let's say a couple of lakhs a month, it's a lot more money than you would ever make anywhere, especially with no educational qualifications, maybe. Of course, they're used also on different levels in terms of social media.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are girls also. Lots
There
of
are girls also?
There are a lot of girls. So, it's, I'm sure people have noted this. And I think there is no way of estimating what it's costing the world right now. And like I said, everything is not reported. But is it going to be a problem for us? It's going to be a huge problem for us.
Well, thank you very much for that very pessimistic picture.
Voice of doom.
The voice of doom. And this is when we have not even discussed Bangladesh,
Oh, yes.
nor the Rohingya issue. I think we'll have to leave that for the next time. But this by itself is a lot to digest.
But can I say one thing? We have to now also be cognizant of the fact that Bangladesh, Myanmar, and the Bay of Bengal is going to be interconnected. It is going to be, taking from Bertel Littner's book, The Great Game East. This is where it's going to be played. We haven't even discussed critical earth minerals. We haven't discussed, the interest in the Bay
Correct.
of Bengal. So I think, we have to now start looking at this more seriously than we ever have before. And I certainly don't mean to be the voice of doom, but this is just facts.
Fantastic. I mean, thank you. We need a voice of doom to get everyone out of their
Comfort zone.
and
Sure.
get agitated and treat this with the urgency it needs. But Ramiji, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
It's
Saran.
very kind of you to come to talk so openly and so graphically about, I think, a very, very critical part of India. This, if we want to develop and do what we want as a nation, we have to keep very close eye on
Very
this
close
region.
eye.
But thank you, and stay safe, and wish you all success for your future research work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining and for watching us. We had Rami Desai, one of the most traveled and scholarly experts on Myanmar, the Northeast, Bangladesh, and you've heard so much from her. Thank you very much for joining, and till we meet again, and do stay tuned in for more episodes of the NatStrat Conversations. Thank you, namaskar, and goodbye.